Scott, who is the co-founder and CEO of Classy. Classy is an online fundraising platform that has raised over $2 billion for social good. Scott will be sharing his story of launching his company and growing it into a top 100 impact company in the world. So everyone, please join me in giving Scott a very warm SDSU welcome.
I like it. Here, I'll give myself a round of applause too. I appreciate the intro. So what I thought would be kind of cool, I'm happy to sort of, go through my story, which I will. But I thought what would be kind of an interesting sort of like combo would be to combine our story and how we started and sort of our journey with an actual pitch deck that I'm currently using to raise capital for the company, which also tells the story in numbers and in sort of, from product to financials to whatever. And so I thought that could be kind of cool because I think the backstory is awesome, but kind of bringing you into the present and showing how we're pitching investors, for tens of millions of dollars to hopefully go public is also kind of a really cool angle on the whole thing and sort of a full circle story. So the deck isn't, prepped for this particular audience necessarily. So I wanted to give that context, and I'll let you know what I'm sort of transitioning through. If that works for everyone, I'll kind of share my screen now. And obviously I'll give you some background on why we're raising the money and what all that kind of means too. Okay. All right. You guys can you see that? Cool. Okay. So we'll stay on this slide for actually a little while because this is the founding story. And when I'm talking to investors or any really big partner, even prospect, a big nonprofit organization that maybe we want to work with, I actually always start with the founding story because it's relevant to who we are, kind of the makeup of the organization, our DNA, what we stand for, all those good things. So the investor deck itself actually isn't that different, frankly, from a sales deck. If we're talking to a new, say, we're talking to Salvation Army, they're a current customer. Let's just say they're evaluating our software. We would enter that situation the exact same way, which is why I thought it would be cool to enter, this talk in that same way and treat you guys like you're learning about Classy for the first time and going through the business. So the founding story started back in 2006, and I'm from Boston, Massachusetts, from a town called Hingham, which is on the South Shore, 20 minutes south of Boston. Is anyone from that area? I don't even know how I would see you raise your hand. Oh, I see one. I'm only looking at 4 people right now, and one raised their hands. That's 25% of you are from Hingham. That's awesome. No, I'm just kidding. So it's a small town. Oops. It's a small town, great place to grow up. I went to the University of Massachusetts and the University of Manchester in England for my degree. My degree was in mechanical and industrial engineering. I started college in the computer science division, actually, and for some reason, it was not resonating with me, even though now I'm in software, so it's kind of ironic that I left computer science and went to industrial and mechanical engineering. And I wasn't a particularly good student, not that I'm promoting that. In the mechanical track, which I started in, it was really hardcore physics and math and things like that. And I really struggled actually to even get, C's really. It just wasn't necessarily using sort of both sides of my brain the way that I, kind of thought I could be, or wasn't tapping into my natural potential, I guess I would say. But in the last 2 years, I found industrial engineering. That was the sort of second half of the degree, and just started randomly getting straight A's. And it was kind of like, I think, sort of calculus versus probability and statistics sort of mindset, if anyone's in some of those classes and whatnot. And industrial engineering also tapped into the business school. So it's kind of like half business, half engineering. Industrial engineering is very applicable to business. A lot of CEOs are actually industrial engineers or operations research majors or business majors, of course. And so it kind of tapped into that line, which was really my first sort of even thought that I might want to be an entrepreneur someday, or at least help companies grow. And so that was kind of a cool thing. I started off doing my internships with manufacturing companies, really actually like looking at product lines, like how products are made through machines, and actually looking at the optimization through that. I found myself interested in Lean Six Sigma, which I'm not even sure that's a thing anymore, but I became a Lean Six Sigma black belt, which is like one of the highest ratings for quality. And it just kind of was, what I was super passionate about. And I moved to San Diego after I graduated. Literally the day after I graduated, my brother and my dad picked me up from school, and we drove cross country, and I landed in Ocean Beach on Cable and Muir. And I had two buddies living there. I'd stayed an extra semester, kind of because of my grades, but kind of because I went abroad. So two of my buddies were living there, and they're like, "Hey, the surf's great, and we're just kind of being bums." I was like, "All right, cool. That sounds great. That's what I'll use my engineering degree for." So I went out there, and my parents dropped me. My brother and my dad dropped me off, and the first day I was looking for my a meal because I was hungry. And I saw this pizza shop that was open on Muir Street. It was called Casanova's Pizza. It's actually called Surfrider Pizza for anyone that is familiar with that area. Or there's actually several Surfrider pizzas now. And they had literally opened that week. And so I walked in, and there was a sign on the outside that said Boston Pizza for sale. I was like, "What is Boston Pizza? I've never heard of Boston Pizza. I'm from Boston. I know New York pizza. I know Chicago type pizza. I don't know what Boston pizza is." So I walked in and I asked him that. He was kind of like startled. Like, I don't think he expected to be called out, 3,000 miles away so quickly on a sign. And we struck up a conversation. I actually asked him for a job on the spot. And he's like, "All right, go get your resume." So I brought him my engineering resume, and he's like, "I don't think this is quite the good fit." I'm like, "Trust me, this is an awesome fit. I want to learn from you. You're starting a business. And, maybe you'll learn a thing or two from me. I don't know." And so my first job out of college was actually making pizza in Ocean Beach at Surfrider, or it was called Casanova's. And it was actually a really cool partnership with Steve at the time, because he really knew his craft really well. He knew his pizza, although it wasn't Boston pizza, I wouldn't say, was actually really, really good. He just had no clue, honestly, about the business side. And he was good with customers, but he wasn't a numbers guy, didn't really know how to do the operations of the business. And so even though I had never really, been part of any sort of entrepreneurial venture or know how to run like a shop or a pizza shop, I kind of just used sort of my common sense and what I learned in school. And I started doing his books and doing like the operations piece while he was making the really good pizza. And then he taught me how to make pizza, which was cool. And I can still to this day flip dough, up in the air and catch it and all that stuff, which is kind of cool. And we learned about not just the operations, but we learned about sales and marketing, and what that actually means. I wish I got taught more about sales and marketing in college, because it's actually quite relevant to real world experience. And I didn't quite grasp the power of sales. I always thought it's like, "Oh, sales, someone else does that, sleazy sales guy or sleazy saleswoman." Like, I'm too good for that. And in reality, sales drives everything. So you need a quality product, but sales drives everything. So he had me going door to door, introducing myself and handing people promo cards, or I'd stand outside the bars and offer free pieces of pizza. So that was really my first experience pushing a product and learning how to sell. And one gentleman came in one day in the pizza shop, and he struck up a conversation. He asked me my major. I don't know how that happened, but he's like, maybe he asked me, I don't know where the conversation went, but he ended up working for Boozow & Hamilton, which is a management consulting firm in town. And that's actually how I got the interview. He was in there for a slice of pizza, and eventually we struck up a conversation, and he invited me in for an interview. So you never know who you're talking to, is the moral of that story. But I went in there and I didn't have anything to interview, and I didn't have a suit. So I went in and bought a suit from probably the thrift store, and it was a couple sizes too big. And I walked in, I looked really unprofessional. And they actually, when I got the job later, they used to tease me that I looked like, you guys might be a little young for the movie Big, but if you've seen Big with Tom Hanks, he wears this massive suit that's like a million times too big. So they'd call me Big, basically, after I got the job. And I did that for 3 years. And I was able to put my industrial engineering to really good use. And I was working mainly with the Navy, but also basically aerospace, and I was doing logistics more or less, helping ships come into port efficiently so they could switch out their weapon systems or their satellite systems. It was basically a big logistical problem. But it really didn't have anything to do with social impact or, kind of maybe where my heart's calling was. It was awesome training. And I encourage everyone, even if the job's not like a perfect fit at first, you always can find something in the job. Like I was an entrepreneur at Booz Allen, and they noticed that, which that just means like, I was trying to create new business for them, and I was just a young analyst. And I would bring my industrial engineering, sort of my confidence around that area. And I brought my Lean Six Sigma degree to the table and said, hey, why don't we start a Lean Six Sigma mini practice? And they actually did. Luckily, they were doing that in DC at the time too, which is their headquarters, and they brought it all together. And so I got thrust at 24 into leading these big projects, which was well ahead of my time and what I should have been doing. But moral of that piece of the story is that, you bring ideas to the table. Don't be bashful. Everyone has a skill set. Everyone has a strength. And so Booz Allen was, I think, a great company. They fostered that. At the same time, I was living now in Mission Beach with friends that I had grown up with on the East Coast. And we all had been affected by cancer in different ways. My mom had cancer growing up twice, pretty seriously. And, chemo, radiation, all that stuff when I was pretty much your guys' age, maybe, a little bit younger. And so that obviously had a profound effect on me personally. And luckily she's a survivor, but my buddy Pete, who I was living with at the time, his dad had passed away from brain cancer. And so we were just trying to figure out, we were 24, 25 years old at this point, all first time jobs, whatever. And we were trying to figure out in our spare time how we could sort of give back to, the cause of cancer research, specifically breast cancer, but maybe anything. And, I'll tell you right now, like we weren't power philanthropists. Like young people these days are eons ahead of sort of where I was at 24 in terms of my philanthropic journey. Philanthropy when I was 24, and this is not that long ago. I feel like I'm talking like I'm 70. I'm not 70, but, it was a good 10, 15 years ago. People didn't do philanthropy early in life. Honestly, a lot of it was done after you retire, and it was done through checks and cash, and it was donated to nonprofits at the end of the year, and you'd get an annual report, this like thick binder, and it would tell you what the nonprofit did. And they weren't really engaging young people in any meaningful way. And they weren't ready at all for what was going to be sort of the social media revolution, if you will, that was just coming about. And this is, in 2006, 7, 8, 9, 10, sort of that sort of era. And, obviously people were on the internet and stuff. That story is not that old. But it really was like the very beginning of social media in a way that people, it was entwined in everyone's lives, and that would affect nonprofits and it would affect fundraising as well. So anyways, we were trying to figure out how to get involved with the local chapter of the American Cancer Society. And we ran into all sorts of issues with their website. It was super clunky. It didn't show up on mobile. The events that they were trying to promote for us were things that we weren't really resonating with. One of them specifically was called the Relay for Life. And that's where you walk around a track for 24 hours. And we were like, I don't know about that. So we kind of just passed up on their website, and we brainstorming ourselves. And what we decided was to host a pub crawl of all things down Garnett Street in Pacific Beach. And we would basically collect cash at the door and just invite everyone that we knew. And so this was not that, this is not a crazy idea. Like, I'm sure this happens, 20 times a weekend in PV still. But this was something that we came up with, and, it was something that we could do, and it resonated with us at the time. So when we were coming up with the name for the pub crawl, the movie Anchorman with Will Ferrell happened to be on in our apartment. And that's why he's on this slide in the bottom right. In that movie, he has a catchphrase that says, "You stay classy, San Diego." And my buddy Pete, whose dad had passed away from cancer, turned to me and said, well, why don't we name the pub crawl the Stay Classy Pub Crawl? Because, Anchorman takes place in San Diego, and it's kind of a funny name. Never in a million years thinking that it would go anywhere but that one conversation, that one pub crawl. Here I am talking to you guys like 14 years later and referencing Will Ferrell, which is pretty funny. And if you can see behind me, I actually have a little shrine to Will Ferrell on the back. You can see the bottom of his face kind of. And that's kind of just a joke too. Every business call I'm on now, people ask me, what is that face in the back? And I get to tell the story. It's awesome. So it all connects back, And so we ended up doing that pub crawl, and we raised $1,000 and 75 people showed up to this thing. And we like plastered the town, with promotional material. We were on, this is when MySpace was actually still like living, which is pretty funny, but we were on Facebook too. So we pushed it through those channels, and we did our invitations on Evite. And so, a lot of people showed up. And I remember going to my, or calling the ACS, the American Cancer Society, from my office at Booz Allen that next Monday morning. And I was all excited, and I told them, like, hey guys, what we had done, we did this fundraiser for you, we raised $1,000. We plastered the town with your logo. Everyone knows about you now. And she was like, whoa, what did you do? And she actually got mad at me for hosting an unsanctioned fundraising event. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, and she's like, I'm like, do you want the donation or not? And she's like, well, yeah, we want the $1,000, but you have to show up to this event called the Relay for Life, and you got to walk around a track for 24 hours, and that's how you need to donate it. You can't just donate it to us. It needs to be through a sanctioned event. So she actually put us through a bunch of more hoops just to give her the money that we had raised. So we went to a bank, we got a check, we went to the Relay for Life, even though we were trying to avoid that from the start. We did one lap around the track, handed it off like a baton, and got the hell out of there. And we were sitting up at the top of the hill. That event was at Point Loma Nazarene. And we're like, why does this have to be so hard? Like, this is like our first foray into like, we're just trying to do something good. What is going on with this? Like, these people are just so out of whack. Like, they don't understand us. Like, And so we left kind of like with this passion in our belly, if you will, this fire in our belly, to, sort of start a mission to make giving easier, period. It actually had nothing to do with technology at the time. We're a software company, but we weren't even thinking, oh, we'll become a software company in 3 years. We were thinking, how do we make giving easier for young people, period. Not just easier, more fun, more accessible, more transparent, all those things that we thought should be pillars of the giving process, but just were not even close to apparent to us when we were dealing with the ACS. Now, this isn't like a trash the ACS talk. They're actually a client, came full circle many years later, which is kind of awesome. And I really do enjoy their work quite a bit. But they weren't, winning any sort of customer experience awards that day. But they inspired a really awesome company and story, I think. So that's cool. So we left and we were like, all right, well, what we're going to do is we're going to basically partner with different nonprofits around San Diego, branch out beyond cancer. We'll do like, youth homelessness. We'll do veteran reintegration. We'll do yes cancer, but other things. And so we would pick a project. We would go to the nonprofit, or we would go to the nonprofit. We'd say, hey, here's what we're doing. We're basically like a fundraiser. Consider us your fundraising arm. We'll do a bunch of events essentially to fund whatever project you think is important, and we'll make it really transparent to our members. They were called Stay Classy members at the time. And that's exactly what we did. This slide, those two events on the right were actually our fundraising events called Stay Classy events. That's actually our concert. That's actually our road race from La Jolla to PB. And the first one would raise money for the San Diego Fire Rescue Foundation. The second one raised money for San Diego Youth Homeless Shelter. And so we were really doing these things, and it was attracting a lot of young people. And we were using probably like 5 to 6 systems to take the ticketing for our events, allow people to buy a ticket like you would on Eventbrite or something, and allow people to make a donation to the charity that we were supporting. And then eventually we were supporting multiple charities. So we had to sort of like figure out how to do that. And really what inspired Classy was that or the Classy, the technology company, was that we outgrew the systems we were using for our own events. The events got so big, literally, where thousands of people were coming to our events, thousands of young people, but also of all ages. We had really struck a nerve, kind of making these things fun, making them accessible, making the projects transparent, that we decided to hire a developer. And I literally went on Craigslist and looked up developers, no joke. And we got really lucky that the person that we stumbled across was unbelievably talented. And he ended up building us, with our help, of course, an app that would allow people to buy a ticket to our largest fundraiser, which happened to be a music concert in Mission Bay with Bass Nectar and Modest Yahoo and Mason Jennings and Pinback and all these other bands playing that we booked, by the way. So we used to book these bands ourselves from CAA and William Morris. That's a totally different story for another day. We learned how to be a concert producer in our spare time. and it was a really good show, but we had 5,000 people coming to this. So we built this app that would allow them to buy tickets and then make a donation and then very simply share you create a personal fundraising page and very simply share it into social media. And the nonprofits that we're supporting turned to us and were like, whoa, what you've built is actually awesome. It's mobile friendly. It's integrated into social in a couple clicks. Your audience is young people. They seem to really be attracted to this. And so they asked us to use it for their own campaigns and events throughout the years. And I don't know how many folks are familiar with nonprofits, but the way it works is there's basically two sides. You have the impact side, the people that work on the programs, helping the end recipient. And then you have the revenue generating side or the fundraising side. It's not that different from, a head of sales in a for-profit is the same as sort of the head of development or head of fundraising in a nonprofit. And so what we had built was a tool that was actually quite useful for the head of development or the head of revenue for a nonprofit organization. And we had sort of stumbled into it because we were supporters first. We were building something for ourselves and we wanted to make it really nice for our attendees. And so that's what they were kind of, attracted to. And our minds were blown at that point. We're like, wait, so, this app is not very good and you want to use it. And so that sort of, made the light bulb moment go off for us. We're like, well, if they want to use our app, then, clearly the competition or whoever's building fundraising apps for nonprofits can't be that good because this isn't that good. And if they're attracted to this, then maybe we're onto something. And so that's kind of where we decided to say, all right, stay classy sort of story, the event side. That was cool, but we're going to sort of phase that out and we're going to really focus on this app, this technology. And so that gave us the confidence to quit our jobs, full-time jobs, and we did it sort of staggered. I went first and then, sort of had Pat, my co-founder, and Marshall here, they're on the slide, kind of going sort of, in a staggered way so that we weren't all jumping in at the same time and risking, everything. Many companies jump right in, it's fine. We have more of a prolonged founding story, but we went through an incubator in San Diego called the Connect Springboard program, which is really one of the oldest incubators in San Diego. Qualcomm went through that, and many other, big companies that, mainly in biotech, but really across San Diego. Now they've got a lot of incubators and shared workspaces for entrepreneurs and all sorts of stuff in San Diego. But at the time, they didn't really have that. So we found ourselves in this one, which was pretty good. And we relaunched as Classy, the technology company, in January 2011. And so I'm going to tell you some stories about that journey, but I'll just skip ahead to let you kind of see how far we've come since we launched as a technology company. So what does technology mean? I'm sure you guys know what technology means, but specifically within that sort of category, such a broad sort of term, we're a software company. And even within software companies, we're a software company that focuses on the nonprofit organization and their donors. And we call ourselves a B2B software company, business to business, which is different than business to consumer. We're not a consumer app. We're sort of the back end for the nonprofit. So we power their fundraising. So they can create campaigns, whether it's peer-to-peer campaigns, crowdfunding campaigns. They can accept donations through their website using Classy. They can build a recurring donor base through Classy and manage the recurring donors. They can do events and registrations through Classy and run events through us. They can do international payments. They can manage their donor base. And we're sort of like, you've probably heard of Shopify. You've probably heard of, Squarespace, some of those types of companies. We're kind of like that combined for the nonprofit. We're almost a nonprofit storefront, online storefront, if you will. So if you went to like Salvation Army and you click donate on their main website, that's us. If you went to Shriners Children's Hospital and you decided to participate in an event, that's us. If you went to Team Rubicon and you donated to them in the wake of a disaster and they're doing a peer-to-peer campaign, that's us. So we're integrated into 6,000 nonprofits and you don't even know we're there. And that's actually how we like it. So we're not GoFundMe, we're not Kickstarter, even though we have functionality that's kind of like crowdfunding platforms. We are a white labeled fundraising platform, holistic, end to end for the nonprofit. And that's really important. And it took us a while to kind of like hone in on that. We weren't that confident. When we first started, we were like, we had an identity crisis. We were trying to figure out who we are. Are we GoFundMe or are we Classy? Classy as it is today? Meaning, are we a B2C company where we're going to go out and build a consumer audience and try to get them all to come to our website and donate to these like myriad of causes? Or are we going to partner directly with the nonprofit and have and basically let them use our software to power their own stuff in their own sort of world and their own community? And so that was a choice that was a pretty tough one to make, actually, because crowdfunding was just starting to take off. Kickstarter was actually better known. Indiegogo and Kickstarter were better known than GoFundMe at the time, which is hard to believe now. And GoFundMe was actually started, I know the founders pretty well, it was started in San Diego. So we grew up alongside GoFundMe, actually. But we were debating, do we jump into this crowdfunding thing like, head on, or do we really dedicate ourselves to the nonprofit organization? And we were reading a book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And I did an offsite. We were probably 15 people at the time. And I did an offsite and we went through this exercise. And in the book, he poses the question for anyone that sort of has a similar identity crisis or needs strategic focus. What can you be the best in the world at? And we went through that exercise and we ended up deciding what we think we can be the best in the world at is helping nonprofit development directors and marketing directors be better at fundraising. We're actually not that good at building a consumer audience. We know nothing about internet marketing and trying to get people to come to a website. We know nothing about that. We would come to learn that later, but we knew nothing about that. So how can we possibly compete with GoFundMe and Kickstarter when really our differentiator is that we've been in the trenches with nonprofits and their staff hosting these events around San Diego. We actually know what it feels like to try to raise money and the pains associated with that, because we did it ourselves. And we were also supporters ourselves. So we were looking at things through a unique lens. We would come in with a fresh perspective because we weren't actually administrators at nonprofits. We were the people they were trying to raise money from. And so we thought that we had a combo there that made tons of sense. And so at that moment, we basically said, we are no longer going to try to do two things at once and do a shitty job at both of them. Sorry if I'm swearing in a college classroom. I'm not sure if that's appropriate or not. Either way, we're going to get rid of this B2C stuff. And maybe we come back to it someday, but we're not going to focus on this at all. And in fact, if anyone talks about this idea, you're fired. No, I'm kidding. But just get out of my room, essentially, because that's a distraction. That's a different business line. And it was hard to do because building a software company, a subscription-based software company, takes forever. It is very difficult to build up a recurring revenue stream and build up a customer base that wants to pay you repeatedly. In some cases, B2C companies can actually be easier to build in the beginning, not long-term. In fact, it switches. B2C is harder to stay active and stay successful, and B2B is actually, once you get momentum, it's like a snowball. You can kind of keep building as long as you don't really suck and piss off your customers. You're going to keep growing. It might take you a while, but you're going to keep growing. And once you get to $1 million, $2 million, $5 million in recurring revenue, you're in good shape. So we decided on this B2B path, which is a fundamentally different business model. But that cleared up, okay, well, this is what we need to do. We need to start refining our software specifically for the development director even further. We're going to get rid of this website we had built for consumers. We're going to become the Shopify or the Squarespace for nonprofits. We're going to become their storefront. We're going to take our brand out of it. We don't care. It's all about them. So we have an internal model that says their brand before our brand. And that's like that's a product development sort of motto, if you will, or like, philosophy, where it's all about the nonprofits brand. So we have, sort of a CMS, a content management system like Squarespace directly in our product that allows the organization to build these campaigns and make it very brand forward for themselves. So when you go to the Salvation Army's website, you don't see Classy there. You see the Salvation Army. Or you go to Team Rubicon and they're promoting a campaign they're doing to you. You don't see Classy anywhere. Again, it's powered by Classy, and that's a good thing for us. So now we work with 6,000 organizations across the world. Some of the logos are here. I have, a splattering of other ones I'll show you. Here's our top 4 cause categories across all of our fundraising. We're about to cross 2.5 billion raised for charities. And it's been about 9.5 years as a software company. Our founding story started before then, of course. But really a big majority, believe it or not, of that 2.5 billion happened in the last 2 years. So all of this effort, all of this work, from pub crawl to events to incubator to figuring out our identity to, you know, decidingly going B2B to starting to grow a software business took almost 15 years. And this is the donation curve that basically shows cumulative donations over time. So you can see the bulk is happening from basically 2017 to 2019. So for the very beginning, when we launched, we were only doing, the first year we launched, we did $5 million, $5.4 million on the platform in an entire year. Yesterday, we did almost $5 million in a day. So it is completely, you know, transformed and grown and grown and grown. And that's just sort of the lesson when I think back on this. Again, think the snowball. You know, it's like you're just starting to get small, and then eventually you just build momentum and more momentum. And if you believe in yourself and you treat your customers well, you know, you kind of wake up one day and you're like, wow, this is a pretty decent sized business we've got going on here. And that persistence and that sort of perseverance has been crucial, because the actual entrepreneurial story looks nothing like this cumulative curve. It actually looks more like this, you know, up and down roller coaster ride. But as long as it's going up and to the right over time, you know, you're succeeding in business. But no business looks perfectly smooth like this. And if you read too much TechCrunch or you read too much business publications, they like to paint a fairy tale story of what it's like. You read the one out of a million company, like say Slack or something, that is very inspirational. But they only tell you the last 5 years of the company's existence and how it exploded. Slack actually used to be a different company under a different name. And there's a 10-year prehistory before they even anyone knew who they were. They were a gaming company. Airbnb, 10-year history before anyone even knew who Airbnb was. And so all of these successful tech companies have this really long, most of them have this really long founding story that no one really pays attention to. They only pay attention to the 3 years or the 5 years prior to going in public that everyone knows about. And I think a lot of the learnings, a lot of the good stuff is, you know, in the curve before that. You know, a lot of what you need, the tools you need to be successful are before people know about you, which is why I put a lot of emphasis on the beginning of the story. I'll go through a couple. I know we're probably, you know, about halfway through or so, and I know there's some questions, so I'll kind of start to wind up. But I do want to bring you through this investment deck a little bit more, so you have a preview, and then I'll bring up slides as there's questions. So, you know, everything starts with the macro story. When I'm talking to an investor, I have to assume they don't even know what a nonprofit is. I mean, they obviously do, but, you know, they may have joined a board of a nonprofit at some point, but I guarantee you 99.9% of any investor I'll ever talk to has ever felt what it's like to be a development director or a fundraising professional in a nonprofit. They have no idea of the pain that our product is solving. And that actually is one of the biggest challenges I've had over the years of raising money and raising capital. It's essentially trying to connect the dots for a person on the other side of the table that has money, that wants to invest in good companies, what the product does, and not just what the product does, why it's valuable. So they're like, oh, that's cool. You have, like, you know, I don't know, it looks like Squarespace. Isn't this just Squarespace? Or, oh, this looks like Shopify. Isn't this just Shopify? Why don't they do this? You know, why doesn't Shopify just get into nonprofits? They don't quite understand that the job of running revenue at a nonprofit is highly nuanced, and it's, you know, it's fairly complex, and it's a totally different world. Shopify is focused on merchants and selling goods and services. They are not focused on fundraising for nonprofits. The actual technology, the storefront itself, the way it looks on the web, maybe that looks kind of similar, but that doesn't mean that the businesses are focused on the same thing. Not at all. And so those types of comments from investors can actually be kind of depressing. But I've used them as ammo moving forward, or as I move forward, to say, why did they think we're like Shopify? Why did they say no? And instead of, like, you know, blaming them and pointing a finger like I used to be, these investors just don't get us, we started to look inward and say, how can we craft our story in a better way to make it resonate, to make it land with them? So we started to tell the story almost more through the donor's perspective, not from the charities themselves. We would get to the charity, but we would start with the donor, because everyone's donated and everyone's had a really crappy experience donating. And so that actually really landed. And we would use this slide. Everyone knows the Salvation Army guy ringing the bell. And this actually was on my first pitch deck I ever did back in like 2013 to seed investors. well before we had raised tens of millions of dollars. And the thing on the left, on the right, Giving 2.0, same bullets, different picture. And the reason why it was a different picture is because we weren't working with Salvation Army at the time. We just made up a picture and put it there. That's an actual Salvation Army campaign now that's powered by Classy, which is pretty cool. So this slide has persisted through, almost 9 years of talking about the company, which is kind of cool. But the macro story is, it's boiled down. It's pretty simple. Everything is moving from offline to online, and giving is no exception. Online giving appeals to younger people, appeals to everyone, but it really appeals to younger people. When you just segment that category, there isn't many 18-year-olds that are whipping out a checkbook and donating at the end of the year to a charity. That's just not happening. They're just giving through their card, they're giving through Venmo, they're giving through Facebook. That's a new reality, and charities need to deal with it. And then the old model, the offline model, the handout at the end of the year, please give to us at the end of the year, that is broken too. That puts too much pressure on the charity. That's not a sustainable business model. If all of your revenue came at the very end of the year and you didn't know how it was going, and you're just basically crossing your fingers, who runs a business that way? So how do you let them create sustainable revenue model where instead of just having a massive peak at the end of the year, you can help them build even revenue throughout the quarters so they can run their business more reliably and therefore make investments that make their impact a lot stronger. And so those three things right there are still core to our pitch today and really resonated with investors. And then I would say on top of that, the fact that the social entrepreneurial movement was starting to kick in. Like, honestly, I met with Andreessen Horowitz when it was they just started, and they're like famous now. I was probably one of their first people that they were interested, but they didn't want to touch us because we were working with charities. And that was like, I got so many no's simply because of the sector we were in. Now people want into this sector. And part of that is because they're realizing that you can actually do good and make money at the same time. And that's not a bad thing. You don't have to be a charity, although I totally promote and, would love to see a lot of you guys work directly for nonprofits. Well, if you're interested in for-profits, there's now a lot of Classies of the world out there, social enterprises, B Corps. And that's kind of how we identify. We identify as a social enterprise. A social enterprise to me is someone that's bridging the gap between those two things. They have a commercial sort of operation, but the spirit of the company, their DNA, their mission, their values, and really even what, the product and service is geared towards the social good sector or something that's helping humanity in a really direct way. It doesn't mean that you have to have a product and service that is, servicing a nonprofit or, maybe lower income population or, poverty in a different country or something. Those are more straight down the fairway. What's exciting to me is that, in my view, any company, whether you're building sales software like Salesforce or you're building widgets in a manufacturing plant, can actually become a benefit corporation and company and apply those same theories to their own operations on a day-to-day basis. So really re-examining the core of who they are, starting to think about the world in terms of stakeholders and not just shareholders, and start to apply for things like a B certification and become an actual legal new entity that exists that didn't exist 10 years ago. So there's a real path for any company to have this transformation to become a social enterprise these days. I'd say the hottest sort of category though is this, sort of the direct down the fairway B Corps, the folks that are actually serving, sort of underrepresented communities or sectors like we are. But that's going to change. I think most companies will become a benefit corporation at some point because consumers and donors are demanding it. I think that honestly, the C Corp and S Corp traditional path is kind of doomed. It might take 10 to 20 years, but I think that every company is going to have a social impact component integrated into its bylaws. Right now, there's only 3,500 B Corps. And actually, we're not one of them, but we're going to be, which is funny. Maybe I'll answer that during the Q&A. But we actually were resisted to turning into a B Corp because of the investors that we had brought on that we ended up finding out weren't that values aligned with us. So that's another thing about raising money. We hit it out of the park for our first, I'd say 15 million or so. And then we made a bad choice for our Series C investment. We brought on an investor that didn't share their same values, and the company almost went under. And we were actually killing it, believe it or not, on the business side. But they decided that they wanted to control the company, and they made some moves to basically not allow us to raise money, and tried to bleed us out more or less. And it was like the worst version of capitalism you could ever imagine playing out in our boardroom with one investor. And because you have to give away a lot when you raise money in terms of, dilution and rights, it's sort of the game you play. It's the tricky dance. And a lot of times you get it right and sometimes you get it wrong. But in this particular case, I got it wrong, and I didn't do enough diligence on the front end to understand what I was getting myself into. Luckily, we beat the odds and we bought out that investor fully. So they're no longer part of Classy. And we've been literally growing double the rate since then. We actually just made the Deloitte Fast 500 for fastest growing companies in North America just this week. And so it just goes to show you can make mistakes, you can bring in folks, you can survive those mistakes, you persevere, even when you're a $30 million company, which is when that happened. We're 30 million in revenue, and we almost died. And so that's crazy, right? And so here we are, 18 months later. That was 18 months ago, and doing better than we've ever done. So I'll shut up. I think that was a lot. And maybe you can float some questions at me, and I'll kind of jump around the deck maybe to answer some of them too, just to show you a few more slides.
For sure. Thanks so much, Scott. I felt like I just watched a movie on Classy. It was awesome hearing the story firsthand. I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question, please enter it in the chat and we will ask it on your behalf. Quick question for you. You touched on B certification. I know you're in that process of securing it. Can you share with us what that looks like? What does it entail to become B certified?
It's actually really hardcore. And it was when we bought out that investor, it was one of the first things we pledged to do. We basically said, because they were the ones that basically blocked us becoming a B Corp, because it changes your governance. And so raising money, if you pick the wrong person, they can be very, very sensitive about any control issues or changes. And so this changes your governance, and it means that you have a responsibility, a fiduciary or a board level responsibility to do right by all of your stakeholders, including society and the environment, in your decision making. So your company is basically just not all about shareholders and making them money. And so we operated that way kind of anyways, and that's why B Labs and B Corps had just started when we started, so it wasn't even really a thing. And so we just didn't get B certified. So we waited too long, and then we brought in this investor. We kind of got blocked. So that was one of the first orders of business that we did. And we ended up finding out, it would have been probably a lot easier to become B certified back in 2011, but man, is it rigorous now. So even for a company like Classy, we had to go through, this really, really rigorous process where they inspect all these different areas of your business, and they break it up roughly by like environment, employee base, diversity, equity, inclusion, the sector you're serving, and how you deliver products and services, and then governance and board stuff roughly. And you basically get there's like 100 questions in every single one of these, maybe more, and you have to answer all of them, and it rolls up to a score in each of those 4 quadrants, and then that gives you your B Cert score. The best B Corps in the world have scores of basically 120 and above. You need to have an 80 to get accepted. And most people fail the first time around and even the second time around to reach 80. We got 115 out of the gates, and that'll be announced in December 15th. So we didn't quite make it into the top 10% of all B Corps right out of the gate. Give you an idea, Dr. Bronner's San Diego company, they're like 150. I think they might be the biggest, the highest scoring B Corp. I'm pretty sure they are. Patagonia is like 135, 140. The only other tech company that I know of that has a better score than Classy is change.org, and and I'm also a good friend and investor in change.org. They have a score of like 130, or 125 or something like that. So, the score is, it's cool, but it's really like, it's what it represents. It's a roll up of all of these questions and how you operate your business. To give you a really, really tangible example, on the environmental side, are you tracking your environmental impact? What software are you using? How are you doing that? Is that legit? Like all those types of questions. On the nonprofit side, how are you serving nonprofits? What's your actual ROI? Yes, you're raising the money, but what does that mean in terms of impact? Like all of those things. So like really, really deep, thoughtful questions. And for every space you're in, it changes. So ours was technology, but there's B Corps that are, farms and food companies and, all sorts of stuff. So they have a whole list of, questionnaire, if you will, for each sort of sector. And they just go really, really deep. So we're proud of that. we've been a Pledge 1% company for a long time. We're probably one of the first 50 there. That's where you pledge 1% of your time, your employees' time, your equity, and or your revenue to social good or social causes. For us, we do a VTO program where it's actually over 1% now, but we have a VTO program, volunteering time off, where in addition to the paid time off days, your sick days you get as a company, or just time off days, we have volunteering days. So you can leave anytime and go volunteer for a nonprofit at Classy, and that's part of that pledge. We also do something called the Classy Awards, which is now the largest social impact award show in the company, in the country. And it's been on the back burner for the last two years, and COVID kind of scrambled it a little bit. We're relaunching it next year. And we dedicate 1% of our income to that award show and funding it. And that award show goes beyond our customer base. So it isn't just our customers that get to participate, and that's any nonprofit, and they get awarded not on their fundraising goals, but on the merit of their impact. So how they're moving the needle on social and environmental issues around the world.
Okay. Well, thanks for elaborating. So we have a number of teams in our incubator program who are interested in exploring that route.
Cool.
Speaking of which, McKenna, who has a company that is environmentally focused on making a positive impact in the environment, she asked the question, in what ways did the incubator, so Connect, in your beginning stage help you the most?
Yeah, so we needed a lot of help because we were a pub crawl company trying to be a software company. So we had a long way to go. Honestly, it was like, I never went to business school, so I would imagine it kind of being like going through, what you would maybe go through in business school. It was almost like rounding that side of my skill set out. I was an engineer, and like I said, industrial engineering touches, the business operations side, but there were a lot of things we didn't really even know, like basic stuff. I mean, like how to build a financial model and things like that. So I think through that process, that helps really clarify our business model. People don't really write traditional business plans so much anymore, but they certainly do, at least from my experience, but people certainly do pitch decks like this. Like we were doing a pitch deck like this from day one, and it's not because you're going to run out and go, try to get investors, but it really helps organize your thoughts. If you can create a story about your company and back it up with numbers in 20 slides, you're in pretty good shape. And if people will listen and understand that, you're kind of off to the races. And I challenge everyone to do that, even if you're not raising money. So that was huge, just getting the storytelling and the business model refinement done. Honestly, our advisors were more like biotech people, because that's what was in San Diego at the time. And so we ended up getting a really strong outside advisory board earlier. Some folks that were entrepreneurs that had run software companies, in San Diego, but also in Silicon Valley and sort of areas like that. And that allowed us to sort of pick their brains, ask questions, silly questions like, how do I calculate churn for my subscription business? Like things like that like you just want to ask, someone in a closed door meeting versus maybe, an investor. So that really helped a lot. And so we had probably 5 people. We're still close with all of them. I think all of them invested at some point, but we ended up building an advisory board, and that's usually how you get your first investors too. It's really a good first step. You build a small advisory board and don't be presumptuous. Like don't just ask them for money like the next day they join your advisory board, right? Give them a little shares or give them some equity in the company. Usually it's 0.25% for an advisor. I think that's still pretty standard. But do what you feel is right. And that, they just work for their equity. So if you come big someday, like they're happy to help and, they get some equity. And then when you are raising a round, you don't even really have to ask. They're going to know that you're raising money. You're going to ask them for help on the deck. You're going to ask them for advice, and they'll self-select in. That's the best way to do it.
All right. Thanks, Scott. So Lucas, kind of shifting gears a little bit, Lucas is inquiring, how have you navigated conflict within your organization?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I would say that I'm probably more like, I don't even know what the opposite of conflict CEO. I'm more of a peacetime CEO than a wartime CEO, I would say. Like I'm more of a purpose-driven, kind of passionate sort of CEO, like uplifting, inspiring kind of thing. And what I had to really develop, like kind of the tougher side of leadership. And it's really important. You can't just do one. You have to do both. And you have to be able to adapt and be peacetime and wartime CEO. And wartime CEO, and by the way, this concept is written about in Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Things About Hard Things, which is a great read, by the way. He didn't make that up, the peacetime, wartime, but he writes about it pretty eloquently in that book. And so wartime doesn't mean like you're actually at war, but maybe the business isn't going as great as it could be, or maybe you had a bad quarter, or maybe you lost a big customer, or maybe an investor said no, and whatever. So that is still wartime to me. It's like bad news. So what do you do with bad news? Do you hold the bad news? How do you react to that? Do you point fingers, or do you look inward to improve? I think that to me is a huge self-learning piece. So conflict to me, if you're talking about like, everyday, day-to-day conflict like that, it's learning how to use it appropriately. And if you're sort of not the person that just dives into conflict or hits it head on, I think you got to work on that. That's a learned trait. Everyone can learn to be better in conflict situations and attack it head on and more directly. But it was really difficult for me to do. I'd either wish it away, or I'd try to like work on, something else so that it would get better. But now I kind of hit it directly in the head. And that also applies to management too. It's you don't have to be the most direct manager ever, but you do have to be fairly direct with the folks that roll up to you. They expect it, and it's good management. And so that's another thing too. It can't just always be, roses and peaches every one-on-one you have with someone. There needs to be feedback, and you need to have that sort of loop going. Now, real conflict, like companies maybe going to die conflict, that's a whole different situation. And I kind of talked about that a little bit more, with the call it activist investor we had. But there were plenty of times where we raised money that we only had, say, 6 to 12 months of, or less of cash in the bank, to operate. And you had to go raise money again to get to the next round. Now we're profitable now, and we decided to become profitable earlier in our life cycle, because we were kind of sick of sort of the rat race of raising money. And now I'm out, raising money. You're never not raising money as a CEO, by the way, but it's way better to be raising money and talking to investors when you can say no, versus, oh crap, I have 6 months left in the bank account, I have to raise money. So you better be putting a really pristine, amazing story in front of them, because if they smell vulnerability or weakness, they're going to give you really bad terms. So that's always a slippery place to be. It's much stronger when you don't need the money. So you're always raising, because you never know who's going to be interested. You're always kind of always on. But it's even better if you can raise when you're profitable, because you really don't need their money. And we've actually never been in that position outside of the last 2 years, which is just something that you work towards as a software company. Most software companies get profitable after they go public. We decided to do it earlier because of sort of how we grew up, and we had this bad investor experience.
Sure. Okay. And Janella also has a question. How did you know it was time to make this your full-time job and quit your regular job?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, I don't think there's any really great time, to be honest with you. There's always an excuse, always a reason to say, I'll just stay on for another 6 months or whatever. So I think you got to dig within, and you just got to really ask yourself, like, is this what I want or not? I think if you try to do both for too long, it's just, you're voting with that answer right there. You're saying this isn't the ultimate thing I want to do. This isn't, like, I wouldn't put it all on the table. Now, I will say entrepreneurial risk assessment is very interesting, or the way entrepreneurs evaluate risk is very interesting. Like, I think people think it's like really risky to start a new company. The way I looked at it was like, okay, well, sure, we're going to go do this and I'm going to quit my job. But, I've been working my ass off at this job, and, I think I'm actually pretty well respected here. And Booz Allen has a pretty good track record of hiring people back. I'll just come back here. Doesn't seem that risky to me. So there's always like, contingency planning. And so one way of mental mapping this is, it can feel real scary to jump out alone on yourself without answers, without whatever. But if you have confidence in yourself with like sort of your core skill set and what you learned in school, like, and you've made good relationships, try to maybe fall back on those and don't burn bridges. And that's how I thought about it. Maybe, it's maybe a little bit different in 2020. Things are just crazy, but maybe it's also in some ways a great time to start a business. because we're in the middle of so much turmoil, and people are really showing what they care about these days. And so I think there's a lot of new opportunity. A lot of the biggest companies were started right around we were started, like 2008, after the recession. And what happens in those times is the competition clears out, and sort of the dust settles. The bad companies go under, or they get bought for pennies, and the good companies sort of rise through the sort of ashes, if you will, not to make like such a dramatic metaphor, but I think it's true. And if you build a durable business, you can withstand any recession, in my view.
Well, thanks, Scott. So I think that wraps up our time to take questions, but you brought up a really great point that right now is an awesome time to start a company. And so for those of you who've, paid attention today, you joined, which is awesome. Maybe you have an interest in starting a company or making a positive impact. And we just want you to know that the Zip Launchpad is the perfect resource for you in pursuing that endeavor. So if any of you are passionate about solving problems or have an idea that you want to turn into a startup company, come see us, or virtually come see us at the Zip Launchpad. I put my email address at the top of the chat. I'm happy to meet with you guys one-on-one and see how the Zip Launchpad can help you pursue those entrepreneurial dreams. So Scott, thank you so much for your time today. I mean, it was so inspirational hearing your story, hearing the ups and downs, and then seeing the amazing impact you've made to date. So thank you for what you're doing and for making a positive impact in this world. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. My 6-year-old was just coming in as you were talking as well. That's why I was giving a thumbs up to the side. Like, what is he doing?
All good. We appreciate it. So thank you and take care. And we hope everyone enjoyed the talk today. Please follow us on Instagram to stay up to date with upcoming events. And happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Thank you very much. It was fun.
Awesome. See you.